Suspicious, a millionaire decided to test his poor girlfriend. He told her that his company had gone bankrupt. What she did next made him cry. Before you hear this surprising story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Jack Thompson gazed out at the New York City skyline through the window of his office on the top floor of the corporate building. His eyes scanned the urban landscape while his mind focused on a single person, Emily Davis, the young preschool teacher who had captured his heart over the past 8 months. The 35-year-old businessman adjusted his Italian tie and ran a hand through his well-groomed dark hair. As CEO of Thompson Enterprises, one of the country's largest technology companies, Jack was accustomed to making tough decisions, but what he was planning to do now consumed him inside. "Mr. Thompson, your 2 p.m. meeting is confirmed," his secretary announced over the intercom. "Thank you, Sarah. Please cancel it. I have a personal matter to attend to." Jack picked up his cell phone and reread Emily's latest message. "Can't wait for our dinner tonight, love. I have a surprise for you." The message was accompanied by heart emojis, something that always made him smile, even though he considered this type of communication too informal. As he descended in the private elevator, Jack recalled how he met Emily. It was in a simple coffee shop near the school where she worked. He had stopped there by chance when his imported car had a mechanical problem. Emily was there, drinking her latte and grading student work. Her smile lit up the room in a way he had never experienced before. Emily had no idea who he was that day. To her, he was just an ordinary man having coffee. The conversation flowed naturally, and Jack found himself fascinated by the way she talked about her students, her dreams of transforming education, and her project to save money to buy a house for her parents, who had always lived in rentals. Now, 8 months later, Jack couldn't imagine his life without Emily, but a doubt gnawed at him. Did she truly love him, or was she with him because of his fortune? The question tormented him more and more, especially after his ex-fiancée 3 years ago had confessed that she was only interested in his money. On the way to his apartment in the Upper East Side, Jack mentally finalized the details of his plan. He had instructed his public relations team to prepare fake news about financial problems in the company. The story would be strategically planted in some media outlets in the coming days. In his closet, he exchanged the Italian suit for more casual clothing but still elegant. Tonight's dinner would be at his apartment, prepared by the private chef that Emily didn't yet know existed. It would be the last night of luxury before starting his test. The intercom rang, announcing Emily's arrival. Jack took a deep breath, feeling his heart race. She entered smiling, wearing a simple but elegant dress, carrying a small gift bag. "Love." Emily hugged him with that genuine enthusiasm that always disconcerted him. "I bought something special for you." Jack kissed her softly, trying to ignore the guilt that was already beginning to manifest. Emily took out a handmade photo frame from the bag, made by her school students. "The kids made it with so much love when they found out it was for you," she explained, her eyes shining. "They used recycled materials and each one contributed a drawing. Look, there's even a little heart here that Peter made." Jack held the gift, feeling the weight of simplicity and genuine affection in his hands. For a moment, he almost gave up on his plan, but the voice of distrust spoke louder in his mind. During dinner, Emily talked about her day at school, about how close she was to reaching her savings goal for her parents' house, and about her plans to implement a reading project with her students. Jack observed her, trying to decipher each expression, each gesture. "Jack, is everything okay? You seem distant today," Emily asked, placing her hand on his. "Just worried about some company matters," he replied, initiating his plan. "Things haven't been going very well lately." Emily leaned forward, her face expressing genuine concern. "Do you want to talk about it? You know you can count on me for anything." Jack felt his stomach tighten. The sincerity in her eyes was almost painful to observe, but he needed to know. He needed to be sure. "It's just some financial difficulties," he continued, studying her every reaction. "Nothing that can't be solved with time. Love, whatever it is, we'll face it together." Emily responded, squeezing his hand tighter. "You've always supported me in everything. Now it's my turn to be by your side." The rest of the evening passed with Emily trying to cheer him up, making plans and suggestions, always with that optimism that characterized her. When she left, Jack remained seated on his Italian leather sofa, looking at the handmade photo frame that now seemed out of place amidst the luxury of his apartment. In the coming days, his plan would begin to unfold. News about Thompson Enterprises' financial problems would start to circulate, and he would gradually begin to show signs of financial difficulties. Jack knew he was playing a dangerous game, but convinced himself it was necessary. What he didn't know was that this test would reveal not only the truth about Emily, but also about himself, and that the consequences would be far beyond what he could imagine. The next morning, Emily was preparing her lesson when her cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was an article from a financial news portal. Thompson Enterprises faces severe financial crisis. Her heart raced as she read the headline, immediately remembering her conversation with Jack the night before. Without hesitation, she called him. Jack answered with a tired voice, different from his usually confident tone. "I just saw the news," she said, worried. "Why didn't you tell me the situation was so serious?" "I didn't want to worry you," Jack responded, carefully playing his role. "Things are complicated. I'll have to make some cuts, maybe sell some assets." Emily felt her heart tighten. "You're not alone in this, Jack. We can think of solutions together." On the other end of the line, Jack held the phone in his luxurious office, observing the panoramic view of the city. The sincerity in Emily's voice disturbed him, but he needed to continue with his plan. Throughout the week, Jack began to implement visible changes in his lifestyle. He cancelled reservations at expensive restaurants, replacing them with more modest places. He traded his imported car for a simpler domestic model. For Emily, each change was accompanied by an explanation about expense containment and the need for liquidity. On a Saturday afternoon, as they walked through Central Park, Emily noticed that Jack seemed especially tense. "I had to let go of my driver today," he commented, keeping his eyes fixed on the path. "And I'll probably have to sell the apartment." Emily stopped walking and held his hand. "Jack, I have some savings. It's not much, but—" "No, Emily," he interrupted her abruptly. "That money is for your parents' house. I can't accept it." "My parents can wait," she insisted. "You're going through a difficult time now. We can postpone the house project." Jack felt a lump in his throat. The money Emily had saved for years, working 2 shifts, giving private lessons on weekends, all that effort to fulfill the dream of giving her parents their own home. And she was willing to give it up for him. "Besides," Emily continued, her brown eyes shining with determination, "I can take on a few more tutoring classes. I know several parents who always ask me for private lessons for their children." With each of her words, Jack felt the weight of his lie increase. Emily began to talk about possibilities for reducing expenses, suggesting that he could temporarily move to a smaller apartment, maybe even live with her in her small rented flat in Queens. "It's not as luxurious as you're used to," she smiled, "but it's cozy. We could split the expenses while you reorganize things." As they walked, Emily continued elaborating plans and alternatives. She talked about her contacts in the education field, about partnership possibilities that could help his company, about how they could save money by cooking meals at home. "You know," she said, stopping to buy water at a kiosk, carefully paying with coins she took from her wallet, "sometimes the best things in life are the simplest. Remember that picnic we had last month? It was one of our best dates and we hardly spent anything." Jack observed her every gesture, every word carefully chosen not to hurt his pride, every encouraging smile. Emily was not just offering financial help. She was offering partnership, companionship, emotional strength. That night, in his still luxurious apartment, Jack relived every moment of the day. He opened his work folder, where he kept the true company reports, showing record profits and continuous expansion. Next to it was the handmade photo frame that Emily had given him, with colorful and imperfect drawings made by her students. His phone rang. It was a message from Emily. "Love, I've been thinking. I have some jewelry from my grandmother. They're not very valuable, but maybe they can help. And don't worry, we'll get through this together, I love you." Jack sat in his Italian designer armchair, feeling the weight of his charade. Emily's genuine concern, her willingness to sacrifice her own dreams to help him, was beginning to affect his determination to continue with the test. But a voice in his mind insisted that he needed to be absolutely sure. After all, his ex-fiancée had also been convincing at first. He decided he needed to take the test a little further, to test the limits of this love that seemed so true. What Jack didn't realize was that with each passing day, Emily's every gesture was not only testing her love, but also exposing his own insecurities and prejudices. The test he had so meticulously planned was beginning to reveal much more about himself than about her. The following month brought even more drastic changes to Jack's life. Following his meticulously elaborated plan, he began to dispose of valuable objects, always ensuring that Emily knew of each sacrifice. What she didn't know was that all items were carefully stored in a private warehouse. On a Sunday afternoon, Emily arrived at Jack's apartment carrying several grocery bags. She had insisted on preparing lunch, arguing that it made no sense to spend money on expensive restaurants at that moment. "I brought everything to make that lasagna you love," she announced, entering the high-end kitchen that was rarely used. "And look, I got some great deals." Jack watched her move around the kitchen with familiarity, separating ingredients and humming softly. Her hands, which normally held chalk and colored pencils, now cut vegetables with surprising precision. "I need to tell you something," she said while assembling the lasagna. "I got 2 more tutoring groups. They're on Saturdays, but the pay is really good." "Emily, you already work too much," Jack protested, feeling a pang of guilt. "I don't want you to overburden yourself because of me." "It's not a burden," she smiled, wiping her hands on the apron she had brought from home. "It's what we do for those we love. Besides," she hesitated for a moment, "I made an important decision." Jack felt his heart race. Emily took a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to him. It was a bank statement showing her savings from the last 5 years. "I want you to use this," she said firmly. "It's all my savings for my parents' house. There's almost $200,000 there." Jack felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. He knew exactly how much that money meant to Emily and her parents, who lived in a rented house in a simple neighborhood in Queens. "I can't accept it," he said, trying to return the paper. "Yes, you can," Emily insisted, holding his hands. "My parents will understand. You know they adore you. When I told them about the company's situation, do you know what my mom said? That family is for times like these." Jack sat heavily on the kitchen stool, feeling the weight of his actions more than ever. Emily continued talking while finishing, preparing lunch. "I talked to them yesterday. Dad even suggested selling his car to help. Of course we won't accept that, but do you see how much they care about you?" The lasagna was in the oven when Emily took her purse and pulled out another envelope. "There's one more thing," she said, carefully opening the envelope. "These are my grandmother's jewels. They're not very valuable, but—" Jack couldn't continue, looking. The jewelry was simple but carried stories from 3 generations of Emily's family. He knew they were the only valuable pieces her grandmother had managed to save during her entire life, working as a seamstress. "We can sell everything," Emily continued, her eyes shining with determination. "I've already researched some buyers of antique jewelry, and look at this ring. Thought it was my grandmother's engagement ring. She gave it to me when I turned 18, said it was for me to use on my own engagement someday." Jack watched Emily talk about selling her family heirlooms with the same naturalness with which she talked about giving classes. There was no hesitation in her voice, no sign of regret or resentment. "And there's more," she continued, now with an even bigger smile. "I talked to the school principal. She knows influential people in the business world, parents of students who might be interested in investing in your company. I've set up some meetings for next week." The aroma of lasagna was beginning to fill the apartment, mixing with the weight of the revelations of that afternoon. Emily had not only offered her savings and family heirlooms, but was actively seeking solutions, mobilizing her network of contacts, reorganizing her life to help him. As she served lunch, animatedly telling about her plans to get more private lessons, Jack felt his charade crumbling. Each bite of the lasagna, prepared with so much care and economy, seemed difficult to swallow. What had begun as a test of love was turning into a painful lesson about trust and prejudgment. Jack realized that he wasn't just testing Emily, he was putting his own values and prejudices to the test. That night, after Emily left, Jack was alone with his thoughts and the leftover lasagna that she had insisted on leaving for him. On the kitchen table, the bank statement and family jewels remained as silent witnesses of a love he insisted on questioning. The next morning, Jack woke up to a message from Emily. "Good morning, love. I managed to schedule a coffee with one of my students' fathers. He's an investor and was interested in meeting you. Can we meet on Thursday?" Sitting on his king-size bed, Jack stared at the cell phone screen with a mixture of admiration and guilt. Emily was moving worlds to help him, while he continued with his elaborate lie. The breakfast prepared by his private chef, whom he still kept hidden, had a bitter taste that morning. During the week, Emily surprised Jack with more initiatives. She had organized her private lessons into a tight schedule, managing to fit in 3 more students. Her dark circles were deeper, but her smile remained unwavering. "Look at this," she proudly showed her new financial planning during a lunch at a simple diner. "If we keep this pace for 6 months, we can gather a considerable amount. And there's more. I talked to my cousin who works at a bank. She said I can try to get a loan using my clean credit." Jack almost choked on his juice. "Emily, you can't do that." "Yes, I can," she interrupted him with determination. "And before you protest, I've already done the math. With the extra classes, I can easily pay the installments." That afternoon, during an actual meeting with his executives where they discussed the company's international expansion, Jack could barely concentrate. Emily's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the positive numbers his directors were presenting in impeccable slides. On Thursday, as agreed, Jack met Emily and the investor at a cafe in Midtown. She had chosen a simpler place, concerned about expenses. The man was Paul Roberts, father of one of her most dedicated students. "Emily told me a lot about you and your company, Jack," Paul began after the introductions. "I must say I was surprised by the recent news, but I believe every crisis brings opportunities." Jack maintained his posture of a businessman in difficulty, while observing Emily beside him, holding his hand under the table in gestures of support. She had spent the morning teaching, and had rushed to be there still wearing her simple teacher's outfit. "Tommy, my son, talks a lot about Miss Emily," Paul continued. "When she told me about your situation, I thought, if she trusts him so much, there must be something special there. Emily has excellent judgment of character." The investor's words hit Jack like arrows. There he was, deceiving precisely the person whose judgment everyone admired and trusted. After the meeting, which Jack purposely conducted vaguely to avoid generating expectations, Emily was radiant. "See, Paul was really interested. He asked to see some projections and company reports." Jack felt his stomach churn. The true reports would show a completely different reality from the story he had created. "Emily," he began, feeling suffocated, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, she surprised him with more news. "Love, I managed to sell some of Grandma's jewelry. It wasn't much, but it's a start. And you know what's better? I found a buyer for her engagement ring who's going to pay a much higher value than expected." Emily's hopeful smile was like a stab in his chest. Jack imagined her grandmother, already elderly, giving that ring to her granddaughter with dreams and expectations for her future. "Don't sell the ring," he said abruptly. "But love, it's the most valuable piece I have. It can help us a lot at this moment." Jack looked at Emily, her tired but determined face, her small hands that alternated between holding chalk and grading school papers, now ready to hand over her most precious inheritance. That night, alone in his apartment, Jack took the ring that Emily had left with him to better evaluate the offers. The simple jewel, with a small stone that had lost much of its shine, seemed more valuable than all the luxurious objects surrounding him. His cell phone rang again. It was another message from Emily. "Love, don't worry about anything. Tomorrow, I'm going to the bank to see about the loan. Everything will be all right. Trust me, I love you." Jack held the ring in one hand and the cell phone in the other, feeling the weight of his choices. The charade he had created to test Emily's love was revealing a truth he hadn't expected. The real test wasn't about her, but about himself. Guilt began to corrode Jack more intensely when, on a rainy Monday afternoon, Emily showed up at his temporary office, a more modest space he had rented to keep up appearances. She was soaked, but smiling, carrying a lunchbox. "I know you've been economizing on lunch," she said, shaking her wet hair, "so I prepared that leftover lasagna and added some things." Jack observed her hands, slightly reddened. He realized they were like that because of the cold and rain, as she had probably taken several buses to get there, saving money on the rideshare app. "Emily, you didn't have to—" "Of course I did," she interrupted him, starting to organize the food on the simple table. "Oh, and I brought good news. The bank approved my loan." Jack felt his stomach churn. You really did that?" "Yes," she exclaimed, excited. "It's $50,000. I know it's not much compared to what you need, but it helps, right? The installments are a bit high, but with the extra classes I'll manage to pay." As she spoke, Jack noticed something different about her appearance. "Where's your watch?" Emily hesitated for a moment, but kept smiling. "Oh, that old watch. I sold it. Actually, I sold some other things too. You know that collection of imported books I had? I got a good price for them." Jack knew exactly which books they were. Emily had put that collection together over years, buying one volume a month whenever she had some extra money. They were English literature books, which she used to study the language on her own, dreaming of one day doing an exchange program. "And there's more," she continued while serving the food. "Remember Julia, my teacher friend? She recommended me to teach at a prep course on Sundays. The pay is great." "But, Emily, you already work 6 days a week." "It's just a phase," she replied naturally. "When your company recovers, I'll go back to my normal routine. The important thing now is to gather money to help." As they ate, Emily told him about her plans to save even more. She had cancelled her gym membership, her streaming subscription, and was thinking about moving to a smaller apartment to reduce rent. "You know what's funny?" she commented between bites. "This whole situation is making me see how we can live with less. Sometimes I feel bad for not being able to give you more financial support." "You're already doing much more than you should," Jack interrupted, his voice choked. "Come on, love, it's the least I can do. You've always been so generous with me, taking me to expensive restaurants, giving me gifts. Now it's my turn to give back." Jack watched Emily eat happily, telling him about her students, about how excited she was about the Sunday course, about her plans to maybe take on a few more private lessons during the week. After lunch, before leaving for her next class, she took an envelope from her bag. "I almost forgot, I managed to sell more of Grandma's jewelry. It wasn't much, but—" Jack couldn't take the envelope. His hands were shaking. "I have to go now," Emily said, looking at the imaginary watch on her wrist where the one she had sold used to be. "I have to catch 2 buses to get to school on time. I'll call you later." She kissed him affectionately and left, facing the rain falling outside again. Jack remained seated, looking at the envelope on the table and at the remains of the lunchbox she had brought. His cell phone rang. It was one of his company's directors, informing him about another $1 million contract they had closed. Thompson Enterprises had never been so prosperous, and there he was, letting the woman he loved get rid of everything she had to save him. That night, in his real office on the top floor of the corporate building, Jack took Emily's grandmother's ring, which he still kept with him. The small jewel, which carried so much meaning and history, seemed to silently judge him. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Emily. "Love, don't forget that tomorrow we have the meeting with another investor I managed to get. This time it's a student's mother. She's very interested in your project. Everything will work out." Jack held the ring tightly, feeling like the worst of men. His test had proven much more than he expected, but the price was becoming too high, not for him, but for Emily. The next morning, Jack woke up to a call from Sarah, his personal secretary, who still maintained her real functions in secret. "Mr. Thompson, the board is concerned about the crisis rumors. The company's stocks fluctuated slightly yesterday." Jack sat up in bed, running his hand over his face. His private test was beginning to have real consequences in the market. He needed to make a decision, and fast. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Emily. "Good morning, love. I spent the night preparing a presentation for you to use in today's meeting. I'm not an expert in business, but I tried to highlight your company's strengths." Minutes. Later, another text. "Oh, and I managed to advance the payment for some private lessons. Hey, it's not much, but it helps." Jack arrived at the cafe where the meeting would take place 20 minutes before the agreed time. He wore a simpler suit, which he had bought especially to maintain his facade of a businessman in difficulties. Emily was already there, organizing some papers on the table. "Love, you won't believe it," she exclaimed when she saw him. Mrs. Anderson, Sophia's mother, brought 2 more potential investors. They're super interested in the company's potential. Jack felt his heart tighten as he saw Emily's eyes shining with hope. She was wearing her best outfit, an ensemble that he knew she saved for special occasions at school. Her hair was tied in an elegant bun, but he noticed that she was no longer wearing the earrings she loved so much, probably another item sold to help him. The meeting started punctually. Mrs. Anderson, a respected businesswoman, brought with her 2 partners from her business group. Emily had prepared a surprisingly professional presentation highlighting Thompson Enterprises' strengths and its potential for recovery. "What impresses me the most," said Mrs. Anderson, "is how you kept the team united even during the crisis. That demonstrates exceptional leadership." Jack swallowed hard, knowing that his team was actually more productive than ever, completely unaware of the charade he had created. "And Emily told us about the containment measures you've been taking," continued one of the partners. "Selling your luxury car, moving to a smaller office. These are attitudes that demonstrate commitment to the company's recovery." Throughout the meeting, Emily held his hand under the table, gently squeezing it in the most tense moments. She had memorized numbers and statistics from the sector, preparing herself to support him in any questioning. When the business people asked to see some more detailed financial reports, Jack felt cold sweat running down his back. Emily, noticing his discomfort, quickly intervened. "Actually, I prepared a summary of the main indicators here," she said, handing out some sheets. "And I have a suggestion for a schedule to present the complete reports next week." After the meeting, which ended with vague promises of new encounters, Emily was radiant. "They seemed really interested," she celebrated. "And you know what's better? Mrs. Anderson told me she has some more contacts that can help. Oh, and I almost forgot." She opened her purse and took out an envelope. "I managed to sell my laptop. I bought a simpler one. The difference is here. It's not much, but..." Jack felt something inside him break. The laptop was her work tool, used to prepare her lessons and do research for her private classes. "How are you going to prepare your lessons?" he asked, his voice failing. "Oh, I can use the school computer," she answered simply. "And I bought a basic laptop. It's enough. The important thing is that I got some extra money to help." At that moment, observing Emily carefully storing the presentation papers in her already worn bag, Jack realized that his test had gone too far. She was literally getting rid of everything she had, piece by piece, to help him. "Emily, I need to run," she interrupted him, looking at the clock on the cafe wall. "I have 2 private lessons this afternoon, and tonight I start at the prep course. But first I need to stop by the bank to sign some loan papers." She kissed him quickly and left hurriedly, her small and determined figure disappearing among the pedestrians on the sidewalk. Jack remained seated, looking at the envelope with the laptop money, feeling the weight of every lie he had told in the past weeks. His cell phone rang again. It was Sarah, informing him about another $1 million contract closed that morning. The irony of the situation hit him like a slap. While his company was breaking profitability records, the woman he loved was selling everything she had, piece by piece, to try to save him from a crisis that didn't exist. It was a Thursday when everything changed. Jack was in his real office reviewing some documents when he received a call from Emily. Her voice was different, choked, but still trying to maintain her characteristic optimism. "Love, can you meet me at the cafe near the school? Something happened that I need to tell you in person." 20 minutes later, Jack found her sitting at a table in the back of the simple cafe. Her hands were holding a glass of water, and her eyes were slightly red. "What happened?" he asked, sitting across from her. Emily took a deep breath before speaking. "Remember I had mentioned about moving to a smaller apartment? Well, I found a place. Actually, it's not really an apartment." Jack felt his heart tighten. "It's a room with a bathroom in a boarding house," she continued, forcing a smile. "The lady who rents it is very nice, and the best part, I'll save almost $1,000 a month on rent." "Emily, you can't—" "Yes, I can," she interrupted him firmly. "I've already given notice on my current apartment. With what I'll save, plus the money from extra classes and the loan, we can gather a significant amount in the next few months." Jack observed the deep, dark circles under her eyes, the hands that trembled slightly as they held the glass, the hair that was no longer as well-groomed as it used to be. "There's one more thing," she continued, her voice lowering a bit. "My parents, and they insisted on helping. Dad is going to sell his car." "No!" Jack exclaimed, louder than he intended, causing some people to look in their direction. "He's already decided." Emily smiled sadly. "He said he can use public transportation to go to work. The auto shop where he works isn't that far from home." Jack knew Emily's father's car, an old Chevy bought with so much sacrifice, which the man kept, impeccable with pride. It had been his means of transportation to work at the auto shop for more than a decade. "And Mom," Emily continued, her voice faltering a little, "she's going to sell her sewing machines, those old ones, you know, the ones she uses for extra weekend work." Jack felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. The sewing machines had been the family's source of extra income for years. Emily's mother did small repairs and adjustments to supplement the family budget. "They said that family is for times like these." Emily wiped a discreet tear. "And that? You're already part of the family." At that moment, an older woman approached their table. It was Mrs. Johnson, the janitor at the school where Emily worked. "Miss Emily," the woman exclaimed affectionately, "you dropped this yesterday." She held out a folded paper. Jack immediately recognized it. It was a blood donation flyer. "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Johnson," Emily replied, quickly putting the paper in her purse. After the woman walked away, Jack asked, "Are you donating blood?" Emily blushed slightly. "Actually, I found out they pay for plasma donation. It's not much, but if I go twice a week..." Jack felt his stomach churn. The image gave Emily, who was already visibly tired. Donating plasma to get more money to help him was the last straw. "And you know what's funnier?" she continued, trying to keep a light tone. "When I was little, I was always afraid of needles. Now I don't even feel them anymore." Her words were interrupted by the sound of Jack's chair being abruptly pushed back. He had stood up, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Jack, is everything okay?" "No," he answered, his voice hoarse. "Nothing is okay. I need to tell you something." Emily looked at him with concern, reaching out her hand across the table to touch his. Jack noticed that she had taken off the ring he had given her months ago, probably another item, sold to help him. "What is it, love? You're scaring me." Jack looked at that woman in front of him, the woman who was willing to sell everything, move to a boarding house, donate plasma, work non-stop, all to help him. The woman whose parents were ready to sell their work tools for him. The woman who, even exhausted, still maintained a hopeful smile on her face. "I need to tell you the truth," he finally said, his voice trembling. "The whole truth." The cafe was almost empty at that time of the afternoon. The noise of the coffee machine in the background seemed deafening in the silence that followed. Jack's words. "What truth?" Emily asked, her face showing a mixture of concern and confusion. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every lie he had told in the past weeks pressing on his chest. His hands trembled on the cafe table. "The company, it's not in crisis," he began, his voice low and shaky. "In fact, it never was. Everything was a test." Emily blinked a few times, as if trying to process the words she had just heard. "A test? What do you mean a test?" I created this whole situation. The news about the crisis was planted, the smaller office is just a facade, my car is stored in a private garage." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack observed Emily's face gradually change as understanding hit her. First came confusion, then disbelief, and finally something he had never seen in her eyes before: deep disappointment. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice almost a whisper. "I needed to be sure that you were with me for me, not for the money." The words came out rushed. "After what happened with my ex-fiancé." "So you decided to test me?" Emily interrupted, her voice trembling. "Like an experiment?" "Emily, do you have any idea?" She took a deep breath, trying to control her emotion. "Do you have any idea what I've been through in the past few weeks? The sleepless nights worrying about you, the fear of seeing you lose everything you've built?" Jack tried to reach for her hand across the table, but she quickly withdrew it. "My parents," Emily continued, tears starting to roll down her face. "My dad is going to sell his car tomorrow. That car that took him 5 years to be able to buy, and my mum, she's already started advertising her sewing machines. I'll explain everything to them." Jack tried to intervene. "I'll compensate them." "Compensate?" Emily laughed humorlessly. "You think it's about money? You think you can just write a check and erase what you did?" She took her purse and started taking out envelopes, placing them one by one on the table. "Here's the money from selling my laptop. Here from my grandmother's jewelry. This is from my watch. This from my savings for my parents' house. Emily, please, you know what's worse," she continued, her voice choked. "I was happy to be able to help you, even selling everything I had, even moving to a boarding house, even donating plasma. I was happy because I thought I was doing something for someone I loved and trusted." Jack felt each word like a stab. "But now I understand." She stood up, grabbing her purse. "You never trusted me. From the beginning, you were testing me, observing me, waiting for me to prove something. I was wrong," Jack admitted, his voice breaking. "I realized that weeks ago, but I didn't know how to stop." "You could have stopped when you saw me sell my grandmother's jewelry, or when you knew I was donating plasma, or when my parents offered to sell everything they had to help you." Emily wiped the tears with the back of her hand. "But you continued. You continued to see me destroy my life, sell my things, end my savings, all to prove a point." She picked up her purse and turned to leave, but stopped for a moment. "You know what's ironic?" she said without looking back. "You wanted to be sure that I wasn't with you for money, but it was you who reduced our relationship to that. It was you who decided that my love needed to be measured in dollars." With those words, Emily left the cafe, leaving Jack sitting alone looking at the envelopes on the table, the material evidence of a love he had questioned and in the process possibly destroyed. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from the bank confirming another $1 million transaction for the company. The irony of the situation hit him with full force. In his obsessive quest to prove the value of Emily's love, he had only proven his own insecurities and prejudices. In the days that followed, Jack found himself in a whirlwind of emotions and consequences. Emily's silence was deafening. No calls, no messages, nothing. He tried to contact her countless times, but all his attempts were fruitless. At the company, things were also starting to crumble. The rumors of the supposed crisis, which Jack had planted, were now taking on a life of their own. Investors began to ask questions, business partners expressed concern, and the financial press speculated about the future of Thompson Enterprises. On a particularly tense morning, Jack was summoned for an emergency meeting with the board of directors. "Jack, what the hell is going on?" asked William Vance, the oldest member of the board. "We have reports showing record profits, but the market is panicking, thinking we're on the brink of bankruptcy." Jack looked at the confused and concerned faces around him. These were men and women who trusted him, who had invested not only money, but years of their lives in the company. I made a terrible mistake," he began, his voice trembling slightly. In the following minutes, Jack confessed everything. He explained about his plan to test Emily, about the fake news he had planted, about how the whole charade had gotten out of control. The silence that followed was oppressive. The board members stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Carla Mendez, the financial director, finally spoke. "You not only compromised the company's reputation, But you put at risk the livelihood of thousands of employees. Carla's words hit him like a punch to the stomach. In his obsession with testing Emily's love, he had completely forgotten about the lives that depended on the company's stability. "We're going to need an immediate crisis management strategy," said Robert Almeida, the communications director. "And you, Jack, will have to come forward and explain this situation." In the weeks that followed, Jack found himself at the center of a media storm. The story of the billionaire CEO who faked a crisis to test his girlfriend spread like wildfire. Newspapers, TV shows, and social media talked about nothing else. Thomson Enterprises took a hard hit. The stock plummeted, contracts were suspended, and market confidence was shaken. Jack worked tirelessly to try to repair the damage, but he knew that some wounds would take a long time to heal. In the midst of all this professional chaos, it was Emily's absence that tormented him the most. He had tried everything: flowers, letters, messages. He even went to the school where she worked, only to find out that she had requested temporary leave. It was on a rainy afternoon, almost a month after the revelation at the cafe, that Jack finally got a glimpse of Emily. He saw her coming out of a bank in the city center. His heart raced when he saw her. But what he noticed next left him devastated. She looked exhausted, thinner, and was carrying a stack of documents that he recognized as loan papers. At that moment, Jack realized the full extent of the damage he had caused. Emily wasn't just dealing with a broken heart, but also with the financial consequences of his actions. The loan she had taken out to help him, the savings she had spent, the things she had sold. He watched her get on a crowded bus, disappearing, among the crowd of workers returning home at the end of the day. The scene was a stark contrast to the life they had together just a few weeks ago. Back in his luxurious apartment, Jack sat on his Italian leather sofa, holding the handmade photo frame that Emily had given him, the only item he didn't have the courage to hide during his charade. The smiling faces of Emily's students stared at him, reminding him of the purity and sincerity he had questioned and, in the process, possibly destroyed. His phone rang. It was Sarah, his secretary, informing him about another emergency meeting with the shareholders. Jack hung up the phone without answering. For the first time in his life, he felt truly lost. His business empire was shaking, his reputation was in tatters, but it was the loss of Emily and the trust she had placed in him that devastated him the most. On the coffee table, next to the photo frame, was Emily's grandmother's small engagement ring, the last item she hadn't sold and which Jack didn't have the courage to return. Looking at that simple jewel, Jack realized that, in his obsessive quest to prove the value of Emily's love, he had lost the most valuable thing he had ever possessed. The weeks turned into months, and Jack found himself on a journey he never imagined he would take. Thomson Enterprises, though shaken, slowly began to recover. Jack had implemented a series of unprecedented transparency measures in the company in an attempt to restore the confidence of the market and employees. But while his professional life was gradually stabilizing, his personal life remained in ruins. Emily remained unreachable, and guilt consumed him day after day. It was on a Sunday afternoon, while walking aimlessly through Central Park, that Jack had an epiphany. He observed families having picnics, couples holding hands, children running and laughing. The simplicity and joy of those scenes hit him deeply. At that moment, Jack realized that his obsession with control and his need to prove Emily's love came from a place of deep insecurity. It wasn't about the money, it was about his own inability to trust, to truly surrender to a relationship. With this realization, Jack decided that he needed to change, not just for Emily, but for himself. He began attending therapy, something he had always considered unnecessary in the past. In the sessions, he explored his insecurities, his fear of abandonment, and the pressure he felt to always be in control. In parallel, Jack initiated a personal reparation project. He started with Emily's parents. After weeks of trying to make contact, he finally managed to get a meeting with them. "I know that nothing I say can undo what I did," Jack said, sitting in the simple living room of Emily's parents' house. "But I came here to try to repair somehow the damage I caused." He explained his plan. He wanted not only to return the money from the car that Emily's father had sold, and her mother's sewing machines, but also to help them realize their dream of owning their own home. "We don't want your money," Emily's father said firmly. "What you did to our daughter." "I know," Jack interrupted him, his voice choked. "And I understand if you never forgive me. But please accept this not as a payment, but as a sincere attempt to correct a mistake. I do this not to redeem myself, but because it's the right thing to do." After much discussion and hesitation, Emily's parents finally accepted. Not for the money itself, but for the sincerity they saw in Jack's eyes. In the following weeks, Jack dedicated himself to repairing the damage he had caused in Emily's life, even without having direct contact with her. He discovered that she was still paying the loan she had taken out to help him, and anonymously paid off the debt. He also managed, through contacts, to recover some of her grandmother's jewelry that she had sold, discreetly returning them. Jack also got involved in social projects, especially those focused on education, Emily's passion. He donated computers to the school where she worked and created a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Months passed, and although Jack had no direct news from Emily, he continued his journey of self-discovery and reparation. He learned to find satisfaction in simple things, to value genuine connections, and to be true to himself and others. It was on an autumn afternoon, almost a year after the incident at the cafe, that fate put them face to face again. Jack was leaving a meeting with the principal of the school, where he had implemented the scholarship program, when he saw Emily in the hallway. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Emily looked different, stronger, more confident. Her eyes, which had always looked at him with love and admiration before, now carried a mixture of emotions that Jack couldn't decipher. "Hi," he said simply, his heart racing. "Hi," she responded, her voice calm but with a slight tremor. The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken words, regrets and possibilities. Jack knew that this moment could be his last chance, and for the first time in his life, he decided to be completely vulnerable and honest. "Emily," he began, his voice low and sincere, "I know it's probably too late and that you may never be able to forgive me, but I want you to know that every day since that afternoon at the cafe has been a journey of regret, self-reflection, and change for me. I'm not here to ask for a second chance, but to say that you taught me the true meaning of love and trust, even if I realized it too late." Emily observed him for a long moment, her eyes filling with unshed tears. Finally, she spoke. "Jack, you hurt me in a way I never thought possible, but you also made me realize my own strength. This year has been a journey for me too." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were, but maybe we can start over. Not as we were before, but as the people we've become after all this." Emily's words were like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. It wasn't a promise of immediate reconciliation, but it was an opening, a possibility. "I would really like that," Jack responded, a small smile forming on his lips. As they walked together out of the school, hesitantly talking about the changes in their lives over the past year, Jack realized that, regardless of the outcome, he had learned the most valuable lesson of all. True love doesn't need tests or proof. It simply is, in its purest and most unconditional form. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was full of genuine hope and possibilities. The days that followed the reunion at the school were marked by a mixture of cautious hope and anxiety for Jack and Emily. They had agreed to meet for coffee, a neutral ground to begin rebuilding what had been shattered. The chosen location was a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the luxurious environments that were once part of their routine. Jack arrived first, nervous, adjusting the simple shirt he had carefully chosen, no longer the expensive suits from before. When Emily entered, Jack's heart raced. She was different, not just in appearance but in her aura. There was a confidence in her steps that he didn't remember seeing before. "Hi," she said, sitting across from him. "Hi," he replied, fighting the urge to take her hand. "Thank you for coming." They ordered their coffees, and for a few moments, an uncomfortable silence hung between them. It was Emily who finally broke the ice. "So, "I heard you've been doing a lot for the school," she commented, her eyes studying the cup in front of her. Jack nodded. "It's the least I could do. Education has always been your passion, and I wanted to honor that somehow." Emily looked him in the eyes for the first time. "Why, Jack? Why did you do all that?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Jack took a deep breath, knowing that his answer could determine the course of everything that would follow. "Fear," he said simply. "Fear of being loved for who I was, not for what I had. Fear of trusting and being betrayed again, but mainly fear of not being worthy of the love of someone like you." He paused, taking a sip of coffee to calm his nerves. "But I understood too late that by trying to prove your love, I was actually doubting it. And in the process, I only proved my own insecurities." Emily listened attentively, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "Do you have any idea how much you hurt me?" "I think about it every day," Jack replied, his voice choked. "And if I could go back—" "But you can't," Emily gently interrupted him. "What's done is done. The question is, what do we do now?" Jack looked at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Jack, this year has changed both of us," she explained. "I learned a lot about myself, about my strength. I realized that I can overcome things I never imagined I was capable of." She paused, carefully choosing her next words. "But I also realized that despite everything, I couldn't hate you. I was hurt, disappointed, furious. But I never managed to completely remove you from my heart." Jack's heart raced at these words, but he restrained himself, knowing that he needed to hear everything she had to say. "However," Emily continued, "if there's any chance for us, we need to rebuild everything from scratch. Trust, respect, communication, everything." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Emily. I learned my lesson in the hardest way possible, and I promise that never again." "Don't promise," she gently interrupted him. "Show, with actions day after day." They spent the following hours talking, remembering the past and discussing the future. Emily told about how she had grown stronger, how she had faced financial and emotional difficulties. Jack, in turn, talked about his therapy, about the changes he had implemented in his life and in the company. When they finally left the cafe, it was already night. They walked side by side through the illuminated streets of Brooklyn, the silence between them now more comfortable. "Can I call you tomorrow?" Jack asked hesitantly when they reached the point where their paths would separate. Emily smiled slightly. "You can. But let's take it slow, okay? One step at a time." Jack nodded, feeling a wave of hope wash over him. As he watched her walk away, he realized that this wasn't an instant happy ending, but the beginning of a journey of rebuilding, renewed trust, and perhaps a stronger and truer love than they had ever experienced. The path would be long and at times difficult, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt he was on the right track. With Emily by his side, even if at a distance for now, he was ready to face any challenge that came his way. In the weeks that followed the meeting at the cafe, Jack and Emily began a careful dance of reconnection. Their interactions were marked by a mixture of familiarity and novelty, as if they were getting to know each other again, but with the weight of their shared history always present. Jack kept his word to take things slow. His calls were brief, but consistent. He asked about Emily's day, listened attentively to her stories about the school and students, and shared small details about his own personal and professional progress. A month after their reunion, they scheduled a second meeting. This time it was Emily who suggested the location, a small park near the school where she worked. "I thought we could have a picnic," she proposed on the phone. "Something simple, you know." Jack agreed immediately, feeling a wave of nostalgia as he remembered the picnics they used to have at the beginning of their relationship. On the agreed day, Jack arrived at the park, carrying a simple but carefully prepared basket. There were sandwiches, fruits, and even the homemade cookies that Emily loved so much. He had asked her mother for the recipe and tried to make them himself, with surprisingly good results. Emily arrived shortly after, carrying a thermos with coffee. "I thought you might like this," she smiled, showing the thermos. They sat on a bench under a large tree, the autumn sun filtering through the leaves. For a moment, they sat in silence, just appreciating the landscape and each other's company. "How are things at school?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Emily smiled, her eyes lighting up as they always did when she talked about her work. "They're going well. You know that reading project I wanted to implement? We finally managed to start it." Jack listened attentively as she described the project, how the children were responding, the challenges she faced. He found himself admiring not just what she was saying, but how she was saying it, the passion in her voice, the sparkle in her eyes. "And you?" she asked after a while. "How are things at the company?" Jack hesitated for a moment. "They're different. We've implemented several changes. More transparency, more focus on social responsibility. It hasn't been easy, but I feel we're on the right track." Emily observed him carefully. "You seem different when you talk about the company now." "That's because I am different," Jack admitted. "Before it was all about numbers, profits, expansion. Now I'm trying to build something with more purpose." They continued talking, sharing stories from their days, laughing at small anecdotes. At times it was almost like before, the ease of conversation, the comfort of each other's presence. But there was also a new layer of caution, of vulnerability. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues, Jack felt it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Emily," he began, his voice serious, "I know we still have a long way to go, but I want you to know that I'm committed to this, to us." Emily looked him in the eyes, her expression soft but cautious. "I know, Jack, and I appreciate that, but... She took a deep breath before continuing. "But I'm still afraid to trust completely again, afraid of getting hurt. And I know you must have your fears too." Jack nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I do. Afraid of not being worthy of your trust, of making the same mistakes." Emily reached out, lightly touching his hand. It was the first physical contact they had shared since the reunion, and Jack felt as if an electric current ran through his body. "I think it's normal for us to be afraid," she said softly. "The important thing is not to let fear paralyze us. We can be afraid and still move forward one step at a time." Jack intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling a wave of gratitude and hope. "One step at a time," he repeated. As they walked out of the park, side by side but not yet holding hands, Jack realized that this moment, this simple picnic in an ordinary park, meant more to him than all the dinners at expensive restaurants or extravagant gifts he had ever given. It was a new beginning, built not on grand gestures or grandiose declarations, but on small moments of truth, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt that he was exactly where he should be, walking beside the woman who had taught him the true meaning of love and forgiveness. The following months brought a series of changes for both Jack and Emily. Their meetings became more frequent but remained simple and unpretentious. Coffees in small cafes, walks in the park, even a visit to a book fair that Emily was organizing at the school. Jack, in particular, was going through a significant transformation. Thompson Enterprises, under his new direction, began to get more actively involved in social and environmental projects. An initiative that made him particularly proud was a technology education program for public schools. "You know," he said to Emily during one of their meetings, "I think I finally understood what you always said about the power of education to change lives." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and tenderness. "It's good to see you discovering this for yourself." Their relationship was evolving slowly but steadily. Trust, so badly shaken, was beginning to rebuild brick by brick. Emily noticed the changes in Jack, not just in his actions, but in his way of seeing the world. One day, as they walked down Fifth Avenue after watching a play, Jack made an unexpected proposal. "What do you think about coming here next Sunday? There's a social action I'm organizing with the company. We're going to set up tents for free medical care and career guidance." Emily looked at him surprised. "You're organizing this personally?" Jack nodded, a little embarrassed. "Yes, it's something I've been thinking about for some time. You know, using the company's resources to really make a difference in people's lives." "I'd love to participate," Emily replied, her smile widening. On Sunday, they met early on Fifth Avenue. The place was full of colorful tents, health professionals, career counselors, and volunteers. Jack, dressed in a simple t-shirt with the company logo, was helping organize the lines. Emily watched, impressed, as he interacted with people, not as a billionaire CEO, but as someone genuinely interested in helping. At one point, she saw him consoling an elderly lady who was nervous before a medical consultation. "Don't worry, Mrs. Rodriguez," she heard him say gently. "We're here to help. Everything will be okay." In that instant, Emily felt something change inside her. It was as if the last piece of a puzzle finally fit into place. This man before her was no longer the Jack who had set up a cruel test to prove her love. He was someone new, someone who had learned, grown, and transformed. At the end of the day, exhausted but satisfied, they sat on a nearby bench. "It was amazing, Jack," Emily said, her voice filled with emotion. "Seeing all these people being helped, it's really inspiring." Jack smiled, but there was a note of seriousness in his voice when he replied, "You know, Emily, none of this would have happened if it wasn't for you." "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. "You taught me the value of things I had never really considered before. Compassion, empathy, the genuine desire to make a difference. I always thought success was just about profits and expansion, but now I understand that it's much more than that." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and held Jack's hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. Jack looked at their intertwined hands, then back to Emily's eyes. There was a silent question there, a cautious hope. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I know we're still rebuilding and that it might be too soon for this, but would you have dinner with me next Friday? Like a real date?" Emily was silent for a moment, her heart racing. Finally, with a soft smile, she answered, "Yes, Jack, I'd love to." As the sun set over Fifth Avenue, casting a golden glow over the city, Jack and Emily remained seated, hands clasped, looking to the future with a mixture of hope and determination. The path ahead was still long, but for the first time in a long time, both felt they were truly ready to walk it together. Friday arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness for both Jack and Emily. They had agreed to meet at a simple but cozy restaurant in Greenwich Village, a place quite different from the luxurious establishments Jack used to frequent in the past. Jack arrived first, wearing a light blue shirt and dark pants, a more casual look than his former expensive suits. He had spent the entire afternoon in a tense meeting with investors, discussing the company's new social guidelines, but now, sitting at the restaurant table, he felt a completely different kind of anxiety. When Emily entered, Jack felt his heart race. She looked beautiful in a simple dress, her hair loose framing her face. For a moment, it was as if time had turned back before all the mess he had created. "Hi," she said, smiling shyly as she sat down. "Hi," he replied, resisting the urge to stand up and pull out the chair for her as he used to do. "You look beautiful." The dinner started a bit tensely, both aware of the weight of this moment. But gradually, the conversation flowed more naturally. They talked about work, about the social project from last Sunday, about dreams and plans for the future. "You know," Emily said, after a moment of comfortable silence, "I never thought we'd be here again. There were moments when I thought everything was over forever." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of his past actions. "Me too, and I would have completely understood if you never wanted to see me again." Emily looked him in the eyes, her expression serious. "For a long time, that's how I felt. But then, I started to see changes, not just in you, but in the impact your actions were having on other people's lives." She paused, taking a sip of her wine before continuing. "The project at the school, the scholarship program, the social action. Jack, you've really changed." "Thanks to you," he responded softly. "You showed me a world I didn't even know existed. A world where success isn't measured just by numbers in a bank account, but by the positive impact we can have on others' lives." Emily smiled, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "Jack, I'm still afraid sometimes, afraid to trust completely again." Jack reached out across the table, gently touching her hand. "I understand, and I want you to know that I'm willing to regain your trust, no matter how long it takes. Day after day, action after action." They remained silent for a moment, their hands joined on the table. It was Emily who finally broke the silence. "Remember our first fight? When you wanted to give me that super expensive necklace, and I said, I preferred something more meaningful." Jack laughed softly. "How could I forget? It was the first time someone said no to an expensive gift from me." "Well," Emily continued, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "do you know what I really wanted back then?" "What?" "For you to come with me on one of my school field trips, spend an entire day with 5-year-olds playing in the park, telling stories." Jack felt a wave of regret as he realized how many opportunities he had missed in the past. But then an idea came to his mind. "Emily," he said, gently squeezing her hand, "I know I can't go back and change the past, but what if we started over? Not as we were before, but as the people we've become now." He took a deep breath before continuing. "What do you think about going together on your class's next field trip? No luxuries, no pretensions, just the two of us, the children, and a day in the park." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but there was a radiant smile on her face. "I would love that, Jack, more than you can imagine." At that moment, sitting at the table of a simple restaurant in Greenwich Village, Jack and Emily made a new promise to each other. Not with grand words or extravagant gestures, but with the silent certainty that this time they would build something true, based on mutual understanding, respect, and a love that had been tested and strengthened by adversity. The day of the SIAC school field trip dawned sunny and pleasant. Jack woke up early, a mixture of anxiety and excitement bubbling in his chest. He dressed casually, jeans, t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers, something he rarely wore before. He arrived at the school before the agreed time, watching the children arrive excited, their small, colorful backpacks full of snacks and toys for the day in the park. When Emily appeared, coordinating the line of eager students, Jack felt his heart fill with an emotion he couldn't name. "Good morning, Mr. Jack," shouted one of the students, recognizing him from previous visits to the school. Soon, a small crowd of children surrounded him, asking questions and pulling his shirt with curious little hands. Emily observed the scene with a smile, seeing how Jack crouched down to be at the children's height, patiently answering each question, no matter how absurd. It was a side of him that she was discovering and appreciating more and more. The day in the park was a transformative experience for Jack. He ran, played, told stories, and even helped clean scraped knees. He saw the world through the children's eyes, full of wonders, possibilities, and pure joy. During a moment of calm while the children were having their snacks, Jack and Emily sat on a nearby bench, observing the group. "Thank you for this," Emily said softly. "It means a lot to me to see you here being part of this world." Jack smiled, feeling lighter than he remembered in years. "I'm the one who should thank you, Emily. You've opened my eyes to so many things. You know, this morning before coming here, I signed the documents to create an educational foundation. We're going to expand the scholarship program and create technology centers in underprivileged areas." Emily looked at him, surprised and moved. "Jack, that's incredible. And there's more," he continued, turning to face her. "I want you to be part of this, not as my girlfriend, but as a professional. Your experience, your passion for education, it's exactly what we need to make this work." Emily was speechless for a moment, processing what she had just heard. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Jack replied with a gentle smile. "You don't have to decide now. It's a professional proposal, independent of our personal relationship." Before Emily could respond, they were interrupted by a chorus of children's voices calling them to participate in a game. The rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter, games, and precious moments. At the end of the afternoon, as they helped gather the children for the return to school, Jack and Emily exchanged a knowing look. There was something different in the air, a sense of possibilities and new beginnings. After the last child was handed over to their parents, they walked together through the now quiet school courtyard. "It was an amazing day," Jack commented, his voice soft. Emily nodded, a tired but happy smile on her face. "It really was. Thank you for coming." They stopped near the school gate, the setting sun casting a golden glow over everything. Jack turned to Emily, taking her hands in his. "Emily," he began, his voice full of emotion, "I know we're still rebuilding, that there's still a long road ahead. But today I had a vision of the future I want to build. A future where I can make a difference, where I can be a better person, and I want to build that future with you by my side." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "Jack, I'm not asking for an answer now," he continued. "I just want you to know that I'm committed to this, to us, to the person I've become thanks to you." Emily looked him in the eyes, seeing there no longer the arrogant businessman she had met, but a man transformed by love and understanding. "I want that future too, Jack," she responded softly. "One step at a time, remember." Jack smiled, leaning in to kiss her gently. It was a kiss different from all the others they had shared. It wasn't filled with unbridled passion or lust, but with promise, understanding, and a love that had been tested and strengthened by adversity. As they walked together out of the school hand in hand, Jack and Emily knew they were at the beginning of a new journey. A journey that wouldn't be defined by cruel tests or mistrust, but by mutual understanding, joint growth, and a love that had learned to overcome even the most difficult obstacles. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Jack's office at the Thompson Foundation for Education. 5 years had passed since that day in the school park, and much had changed. The foundation, which had started as a small project, was now one of the largest educational organizations in the country. Under the joint direction of Jack and Emily, they had established more than 50 technology centers in underprivileged areas and provided thousands of scholarships. Jack watched from the window the movement in the courtyard of the main educational center, located where the old Thompson Enterprises headquarters used to be. Children ran, teachers talked, and in the midst of it all was Emily, coordinating a new class of teachers in training. "Your coffee, sir," said Sarah, his faithful secretary, entering the room. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, turning to his desk. "And please, how many times do I have to ask you to just call me Jack?" Sarah smiled. Even after all these years, some formalities were hard to break. "Emily asked me to remind you about dinner tonight." Jack smiled, unconsciously touching the ring on his left finger. 3 years of marriage, and he still felt butterflies in his stomach when he thought of Emily. The wedding had been simple, held in the courtyard of the school where it all began. Emily's students were the ring bearers and flower girls, and the reception was a big community picnic. No excessive luxuries or ostentation, just love, joy, and the presence of the people who really mattered. His phone vibrated with a message from Emily. "Don't forget that today is a special day. I love you." Jack smiled, remembering the envelope he kept in his drawer. It was the final approval for the largest project they had ever developed together, a network of model schools that would combine quality education with cutting-edge technology, completely free for underprivileged communities. But there was another reason for the day to be special, something that only he knew for now. After months of secret planning with Emily's parents, the dream house she had always wanted for them was finally ready. It wasn't a luxurious mansion, but a cozy house with a large backyard, and most importantly, located just a few blocks from the house he had helped her parents buy years ago. That night, when Emily entered that house for the first time, she would find not only the realization of an old dream, but also a fully decorated nursery. Jack had discovered about the pregnancy weeks earlier when he found the test hidden in the bathroom, but decided to wait for her to tell him when she felt ready. "Sarah," he called through the intercom, "can you cancel my afternoon meetings? I need to take care of some personal details." Picking up his jacket, Jack went down to the courtyard. Emily was finishing a lecture, her face lit up by the enthusiasm she always showed when talking about education. "Hey," he said softly when she finished, "how about we sneak out early today?" Emily smiled, that same smile that had won his heart years ago. "Mr. Thompson, that's very unprofessional of you." "Mrs. Thompson," he replied playfully, "sometimes we have to break the rules." As they walked hand in hand out of the educational center, Jack thought about how his life had changed. The man who had once created a cruel test to prove someone's love now lived each day trying to be worthy of that love. The sun was beginning to set when Jack and Emily arrived at the address he had mysteriously entered into the GPS. Throughout, The journey, Emily had tried to guess where they were going, but Jack maintained the secret with an enigmatic smile. "Jack, where are we?" Emily asked when the car stopped in front of a two-story house with a beautiful garden. "Close your eyes," he asked softly. Emily obeyed, feeling Jack guide her along the stone path of the garden. The aroma of jasmine in the air was delicious, and she could hear the soft sound of a water fountain. "You can open them," he finally said. Emily opened her eyes and gasped. They were on the porch of a beautiful house, exactly the way she had always dreamed. Large windows, a cozy porch with a swing, and a garden that seemed to have come straight out of her childhood dreams. "Jack," she began, but the words failed. "Welcome to our home," he said softly, handing her a key with a red bow. Tears began to roll down Emily's face when she realized that the house was just a few blocks away from her parents' house. Jack had remembered every detail she had mentioned over the years about her dream of living close to family. "Do you want to see the rest?" he asked, his heart racing at the thought of the nursery. Emily nodded, still speechless. Jack guided her through the house, showing each carefully planned room. The spacious kitchen where she had always wanted to bake cookies with the children, the library that would be perfect for preparing her classes, the office overlooking the garden. Finally, they reached the last room on the second floor. Jack paused at the door, his heart beating fast. "This," he said softly, "is my favorite room." When he opened the door, Emily brought her hands to her mouth, tears now flowing freely. It was a perfect nursery, decorated in soft shades of green and yellow. A delicate mobile hung over the crib, and on the walls were drawings of trees and birds. How did you know?" she whispered. Jack smiled, pulling her close. "I found the test a few weeks ago. I was waiting for you to tell me when you were ready." Emily buried her face in his chest, sobbing softly. "I was going to tell you at dinner tonight. I had a whole plan." "Well," Jack laughed, "it seems we had the same idea about surprises." They stood there embracing in the middle of the nursery, the setting sun casting a golden glow through the windows. Emily looked around, noticing the small details, the children's books on the shelf, the soft rug, the nursing chair in the corner. "It's perfect," she whispered. "All of this, it's simply perfect." Jack kissed her softly, tasting the salty flavor of her tears. "You deserve all this and much more, Emily. You changed my life, showed me what really matters. This house, our baby, it's just the beginning of everything I want to build with you." Emily smiled through her tears. "Who would have thought that that arrogant businessman who tried to test me would become this amazing man?" "It was you who transformed me," he replied sincerely. "Your love, your strength, your ability to forgive. You taught me what it really means to love someone." They spent the rest of the night exploring their new home, making plans, dreaming about the future. Emily was already imagining the birthday parties in the garden, the Christmas nights on the porch, the lazy Sunday mornings with their baby. When they finally sat on the porch watching the stars, Emily rested her head on Jack's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For changing, for becoming this wonderful man, for giving me this life that I didn't even know I could dream of." Jack kissed her forehead affectionately. "No, Emily, I'm the one who should thank you, for giving me a second chance, for teaching me the true meaning of love." The night was perfect, and there in their new home with a baby on the way, Jack and Emily knew they had finally found their place in the world, together. It was a Sunday afternoon 2 years later. The garden of the Thompson house was decorated with colorful balloons and ribbons. A banner hung between two trees announced, "Happy second birthday, Sophie." Little Sophie, with her dark curls and bright eyes like her mother's, ran through the garden with other children, her little pink dress fluttering in the wind. Jack watched her from the porch, his heart overflowing with love. "Thoughtful?" Emily asked, approaching with a cup of coffee for him. Jack smiled, pulling her close. His hand rested gently on Emily's belly, where their second child, a boy, had been growing for 6 months. "I was thinking about how life takes turns," he replied. "Do you know what happened exactly on this day, 7 years ago?" Emily thought for a moment, then her eyes widened with realization. The day you started that silly test? Jack nodded, a trace of shame still present in his expression. And look where we are now. The garden was full of life. Emily's parents chatted animatedly with other guests. Her father, now retired from the auto shop, had become a doting grandfather who spent hours playing with Sophie. Her mother continued to do her sewing work, but now for pleasure, not necessity, and was famous for the little dresses she created for her granddaughter. In the play area Jack had built, several children played, many of them children of Foundation, employees or students from the schools they had created together. The Thompson Foundation for Education had become a model of success, inspiring similar projects across the country. "Daddy!" Sophie shouted, running towards them with outstretched arms. Jack picked her up, covering her little face with kisses. "Are you enjoying your party, Princess?" "Yes," she replied excitedly. "Aunt Sarah gave me a teacher doll." Jack and Emily exchanged a smile. Sophie, even so young, already showed the same passion for education as her mother. Her favorite games involved teaching her dolls and teddy bears. "Emily," Jack said softly after Sophie returned to play with her little friends, "do you regret it?" "Regret what?" "Giving me a second chance, believing that I could change." Emily looked him in the eyes, that same look that had captured his heart years ago. "Never. You know why? Because you didn't just change. You transformed into the best version of yourself. And not for me, but for yourself." Jack kissed her softly, feeling the baby kick against his hand that still rested on her belly. "Mommy, Daddy, time to sing happy birthday," Sophie shouted, running back to them. The family gathered around the cake, a beautiful handmade work, decorated with sugar books, a tribute to Sophie's passion for stories. As everyone sang happy birthday, Jack looked around, feeling deep gratitude. There was his family, not just Emily, Sophie, and the baby on the way, but everyone who was part of their lives. Emily's parents, who had forgiven him and accepted him as a son. Sarah, who besides being a secretary had become a dear friend. The teachers and students of the foundation, who shared their dreams of a better world through education. When Sophie blew out the candles, making everyone applaud, Jack realized that his life had come full circle. The man who once thought he could buy and test love had transformed into someone who understood that true love, whether for a woman, for a daughter, or for humanity, was something built day by day, with actions, respect, and dedication. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked, noticing his distant look. "About how grateful I am," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Grateful that you taught me that true love doesn't need tests. It simply is." Emily smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "And it will continue to be, my love. Always." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the garden. Sophie ran with her little friends, her musical laughter filling the air. The baby moved in Emily's belly, as if he also wanted to participate in the celebration. And there, in that perfect moment, Jack knew with absolute certainty, it wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of many others. Stories of love, growth, transformation, stories that would continue to be written day after day, with love as their driving force and gratitude as their compass.